Hello everybody, Game Cooker US Rocks VR here. How y'all doing? Um, just decided to do a video about CPU power, right? Processor power. So Hardware Unboxed did a video on testing the 14700K versus the 9700X from AMD. Um, and at the end of the video, after all the benchmarks, they were showing like which processor used more power. And, obviously the Intel chip used more power. Um, but the little bit of an issue that I have with that presentation at the end there is that the power was recorded when doing 1080p tests, right? So, um, and the processor uses more power at 1080p because you're more CPU bound, right? So you're going to use more power. Now, I do understand that the Ryzen chips use less power than the Intel chips, but I just wanted to show the difference between the power usage at 1080p and the power usage at 4K. Because if I am going to go out and buy a 14700K or higher, then I'm probably not going to be doing 1080p gaming, right? Even in a competitive game, right? I'm not going to buy a 14700K. Now, if I have money to spend, of course I could buy the better chip, the higher chip. But it's most likely if I have money to blow, then I'm probably not worrying about my power bill, right? But if I am buying, like, say, I don't know, a 5800X3D or 5600X3D or Intel 12500 or Intel 12400 CPU, then I'm not, I'm definitely not going to be pairing that with a RTX 4090 or a 4080 or a 7900 XTX or even a 7900 XT, right? I'm probably going to be pairing that with an RTX 4060 or a Radeon 7600 or, you know, an RTX 4060 Ti or a Radeon 7700 XT or something like that, right? So, I'm going to buy a processor for under $200 and I'm going to buy a graphics card probably under $400, right? So, at that point, well, in any case, really, I would be more concerned about how much power my GPU is drawing rather than my CPU, right? Because in a gaming scenario, in most cases, you're going to be using more power from your GPU, right? So if you're not going to use your GPU to its fullest potential, then why are you going to buy an expensive GPU, right? Like if I was to go out and buy an RTX 4090, why would I play games at 1080p, right? I'm going to play games at 4K, right? And I'm going to show you that later. Like I'm going to go through some scenarios. Now I'm using an RTX 3090, which isn't the best example in some things that I'm going to show. I have my RTX 4090 and I might do a video there with the Ryzen chip. So right now I have the 3090 paired up with my 13700K. Okay. So I'm just going to show you the difference between 1080p and 4K in this setup. And then I might do another video with my RTX 4090 paired up with my 7900X. Okay? So we'll be able to kind of get two different things because the 4090 actually is more power efficient than the 3090, especially at 1080p. Whereas the 3090 at 1080p may not be, you know, nearly as power efficient. Well, it's not nearly as power efficient. So 1080p max settings still might use a lot of the GPU power of the 3090. But anyway, let's get started. So my first game is going to be Sword and Fairy. You might be wondering, like, why this game? Like, who plays this game? What's your, well, because I think in a more realistic scenario, like with me, I like playing new games, but I'm also playing a lot of old games, right? I'm also playing a lot of other games that people don't commonly talk about, right? Like this one, okay? So, um, so I'm gonna do like a mixture of games. Now I also don't own like some of the new games because I'm too poor right now to buy any. Like I don't have Alan Wake 2, I don't have Ghost of Tsushima, I don't have Black Myth Wukong, so I'm gonna be using the benchmark for that. So I don't have a lot of the brand new games. So I'm just gonna give you games that I have. Because I don't think it really matters what game I present. What do we got going on here? This thing is like, I don't think it matters what game I present as long as I do a variety of games. You're gonna see the 1080p 4K difference. All right, so I'm gonna load here this one here just because it's just the spot that I was in. All right, so um, just so you can see the graphics here, let me move my OBS over a little. I should put it over here actually, because I'm gonna have to pause it. So if I go to graphics, I'm at 4K. VSync should be off. Yep. RTX is on, but I have DLSS quality. Okay, which does save some power, I guess, but for the GPU. Okay. So as you can see up top, we're pulling about 58 watts from the CPU, right? Okay. And the GPU, we're pulling 336 watts. Okay, so that's quite a difference, right? So in this 4K scenario, you're going to be looking more at the GPU wattage than the CPU wattage, right? So again, we're pulling about 57 to 58 watts at 4K. So if I go to 1080p, I might have to restart the game, possibly. So if I go to 1080p, even with ray tracing, okay, I mean, I could go even lower, but I don't know how low you can go before it starts like diminishing returns. So maybe I'll go down to 1050, 1680 by 1050. Let's see how if it is different from when I tested yesterday, because I already did this video, but the video got messed up and I have to redo everything. So let's apply. Okay, so it went to 65 watts. Okay, yeah, so So we went from 58 watts to 68 watts. So it went. So it's what, 20%? Is that 20%? Almost 20% higher, right? So you could might as well say 20% because it's going up to 70. So I'm just guessing there. I'm not doing the math, but you know, 10% would be 5 watts, right? So it's 10 watts plus. So yeah, so 20%. That's with ray tracing. And you could see that the GPU went from 335 to 309. So, um, you know, that's like 20 watts difference, right? So, you know, the GPU can change more drastically than the CPU when you're changing resolutions. So, um, you know, the wattage isn't necessarily a big deal. You know what I'm saying? Um, but in some games, there is a bigger difference, right? But all I'm trying to convey is that at 1080p, you're going to be using more wattage, okay? So what are we at, 70? I do it this way because I want to see the town back there. So you're saying about 70, so let's change it back to, let's put it up to 1080p and see if what it does. Okay. So at 1080p, it's actually um, going up to like 72, so it's pulling a little bit more wattage actually. So yeah, so 1080p pulls 20% more wattage in this particular setup. So I'm gonna go back to 4K. Okay, but I'm gonna change the. I'm gonna turn off ray tracing. Let's turn off. I'm gonna have to restart the game, I think. I could leave DLSS on because it just looks better. That's the way I would be playing it anyway. Alright, so let's make sure VSync is still off. Alright, so I'm going to pause the video. Alright, so I'm back. So, actually without ray tracing on, interestingly enough, at 4K, weird. So the GPU without ray tracing with DLSS on quality, the GPU is using more power and the CPU is using more power. So that is really, really, really interesting. So if you enable RTX, you'll get lower frame rates, but you're going to use just less power. So I guess that kind of makes sense. Because I guess if you're pumping out more frames, I guess that means you're doing more work. I mean, but you would think, you know, regular rasterization isn't going to be that intensive, right? But it's quite interesting. You use more power. That's crazy. Okay. Anyway, so at 4K regular, you know, no ray tracing with the settings I had before, we're at like 74 watts. I mean, it's bouncing around a little, but let's just say since it's hovering around the 73, you know, it's kind of bouncing around there a little bit. So I'll just every so often, I don't know why it goes up to 81. Maybe the people walking. I'm not sure. The wind blowing. Because I think this game does have weather. But it looks like it's around, say, Average would probably be around 74. Okay, let's just say that for the sake of being simple. Okay, 74 watts. So now if we go to 1080p, okay, now, it is using more power. I guess again, but we have higher frame rates, right? So, you know, again, it's pumping out more frames, but it might take time to adjust. Okay, so it looks like it's kind of adjusting now. So we went from what, 74 to, mm, I don't know. I would say round it up to 83 because it's going to like 82.8, you know. So almost 10 watts more. Okay. So that's like, almost not quite 15% increase in wattage. Okay. So with ray tracing, we had like a 20% increase. Without ray tracing, we have like, say, just to be simple, 15% increase, even though it's not quite that much. Um, but again, the GPU is using less wattage now, right? Um, which is kind of offsetting the CPU usage. But again, 15%, 20% is not really significant, right? Because we're not talking about like 1,000 watts. Like 20% of 1,000 watts is, you know, 200 watts. Like that's a lot. You know what I'm saying? But like in this scenario, 15% is, you know, not even 10 watts here, right? So it's not quite 10 watts more. Now again, as you run around, you can see it's using more. So we're making it up to 90. Let's see how high. Let's go down the water here. Maybe the water is a good example, right? But again, so here it's like still when you stop, it still just goes back to 82. All right, so we went up to 90. I think it was the highest. So let's see how high we can get here. So we were at 90, we hit 90. Oop, can't go any further. All right, so 90 was the max there. Okay, so let's see. So that was what? Originally it was what, 74 to 90. So that's 16 watts, right, from the 4K. So let's see. Let's go ahead and I hope I don't have to restart it. No. All right, good. So let's let it adjust first. Okay. All right, so we're back. We're about back at that 74 here. So let's see how far it goes up. If it goes up to 90. Yeah, so see, it doesn't really even. It doesn't even move that much. So at 4K, you're going to use much less power. That's my whole point, right? Even at 4K, you're barely going over 80. Like, so that's only 6 watts more from the 74, right? So, whereas with the 1080p, we went all the way up to 90 watts. So that's my. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So let's go to the next game. So here we had like with ray tracing versus regular raster, we had like 15 to 20%, right? So that's where the difference was between 4K and 1080. So let me pause the video. Okay, so I'm in Cyberpunk. I'm using this hallway here because, there isn't, it's pretty consistently, doing stuff without like a lot of people walking through. Um, Although the bum just went through, but that's fine. So just to show you the settings, I basically put everything on ultra, which it says custom because I changed a couple things. I just turned off the motion blur and the film grain, chromatic, and depth of field, but it's pretty much on ultra. Everything's ultra. I didn't put it on psycho, just because that's kind of pretty intense. Uh, People really can't run it at 4K on Psycho unless they have a pretty decent graphics card. This is a 3090, so it can do it. But even this game at 4K, you know, uh, even this video card at 4K struggles in this game. So I have it in 4K. I had to put it in windowed mode because I can't get the OBS up otherwise. So um, hopefully that's not really changing anything, but it shouldn't. So I'm at 4K. Uh, Oh, this should be on. Why is this not on? So reflex is on. VSync is off. Again, graphics on high. I do like using DLSS. I don't know if that's really going to change much. I guess we can try it. Put DLSS just on quality. Because I think it just looks better. So again, everything's on ultra. Make sure VSync didn't turn on. Okay, yeah. So let's see if it changed it. All right. So yeah. So we're still at like 4K. We're at about, you know, 82 watts, we'll say, because it's bouncing around a little bit from 80, 81, 82. So I always try to give it the benefit. So we'll just say 82, although it probably would average out to be like 81. So let's go with 81. Okay, so the CPU is using 81 watts. The GPU is using, again, say like, it looks like 340 average, right? Because it's going from like 335 to 342, right? So we'll say 340 on the GPU. And I wonder if it's like the GPU is not really being utilized fully. So let's go ahead and put it on Psycho. Although I think that's going to screw around with the CPU though. But let's put it on Psycho. Now that's going to drop the frame rates. Let's see if that does anything. Nah, not really. So it's hovering at 40 frames per second, still around 80 watts. 81. Yeah, so we'll say 81 watts on the CPU. and still 340 on the GPU, okay? So we'll just run through here and see if it changes drastically or not. But you can see here it's like 84 when you're moving, because you know it has to render things when you're moving. But I mean, it's still pretty out there. It's going to be much higher. But I mean, in the hallway here, it's pretty consistent, hovering around 80ish. So when you're moving, it goes up a little bit. All right. So we'll say 82. So 82 at 4K. So let's change it to 1080p and see how high it goes. This game is really drastic. Okay, and again, so it went from 82 to 130, right? So that's crazy. That's like almost 50 watts more, right? So that's 55% more power at 1080p, right? So that's significant. So this is one of those games where the difference between 4K and 1080p is drastic when it comes to your power usage. Now, of course, again, the reason why it draws more power is because you're kicking out more frames, right? You're doing more CPU power, right? The CPU is working more, so it's natural, you know? But the GPU is still pretty graphically intensive because we're at the Psycho, right? So, yeah, I mean 137. That probably because my followers right in front of me, maybe. So this is like 50% more, 55% more power is being used at 1080p. So let's see how high it goes up when we're walking. Okay, so it probably isn't going to go much higher than this because I'm probably CPU bound now. Because I have my, you know, I have my, my CPU locked at 5.2 gigahertz. Okay. So it probably isn't going to go much above 135. Which isn't bad, to be honest with you, right? Because we're still getting 125 frames per second, almost, you know. 105, 110, 125, depending on where you are. So there's a big difference, you know, here. Let me put it back up to 4K. We can even go to 8K. But I don't know how it's going to look. It's probably going to go oversized. So I don't want to do that. Because I might not be able to get anything back. So that's with DLSS. So let's turn off Psycho. Because that might give us more FPS when we go back to 1080p. So without Psycho, we're like at 82 again. So we'll just say 82. So when we're running, same as before. Boy, Psycho looks so much better. Yeah, so we're still like in the low to mid 80s, pretty much. So if we're just looking down the hallway here, we're at, 81, 82, right? So let's just say, it's like 77, 79, so it's less. So let's just say 80, okay, without Psycho. So now we're gonna go to 1080p and see if we can get some more frames. Turning off Psycho and see what the wattage is. Alright, so still about the same. So we're probably hitting the CPU limit here. So it's about the same. So it's still about, 55% increase in wattage. That's a lot going from 4K to 1080p, right? And that's what I'm trying to say, right? You can't, you can't just go by like 1080p benchmarks if with the wattage, because if you're not going to play at 1080p, right, you're going to be using 50 watts less. you know? And those Ryzen chips, they may use less wattage, but that's under the conditions that they're being put under, right? If you play at 4K with the Ryzen chip and play at 4K with the Intel chip, it very well might be just about the same wattage usage because now the GPU is taken over, right? So, yeah. So anyway, that's it for Cyberpunk. I'm gonna go to the next game. Be right back. Okay, I am in DSX Mankind Divided. Since I don't have like a brand new game besides Cyberpunk, well, that's not brand new anymore. I do have Black Myth Wukong, which I'm going to be doing that one, and I might do the Final Fantasy 16 demo. So right now we're in Mankind Divided. This game still is pretty graphically intensive for older GPUs, like say this one, like my RTX 3090, right? It still makes that work. Now the 4090, obviously that one's probably going to not even be an issue. But the 3090, it's old now. It's 4 years old, so it's it's working. So right now I have the display at 4K. Now I have the MSAA at 2 times, which I think looks the best, although it does make um, it is pretty intensive. Um, so it does take more performance out of the GPU, which may affect the 1080p results. We'll see though. But we're at 4K, VSync's off. Graphics I have it very high, and I just left it at the normal settings, although I hate motion blur. But just so you can see it here, everything's at very high. I'll put anitropic up to 16. I'll turn off motion blur, turn off bloom, depth of field, I don't really like that. Um, chromatic aberration, I don't like that either. So pretty much we can go with those settings, it'd be fine. So let's make sure they stuck. 4K. Everything's very high. All right, good. So we're going to do the benchmark, right? And then you'll be able to look at the wattage right here. I don't know if you can see I don't know why my cursor is not being shown. Well, anyway, you can see the wattage um, up in the top right there where it says CPU. It's at 55 watts on the menu screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to benchmark and see what the maximum wattage is it's going to pull. Ooh, it's working hard, man. That MSAA is like rough. It's a short benchmark, so just bear with me. But again, the GPU is pulling 340 watts. 345. So the highest I've seen it go so far is like 67, 75 there by the food. Because I guess turning, right? Turning's going to be more intensive. But predominantly we're in the 60s, right? For the most of it. It's just when it's turning, it goes up. But for the most part, it's like in the mid 60s, you know. It's probably would average about 66. All right. So low like mid to upper 60s, we'll say. Okay. So if we go back to display now and we go to 1080p, see it's not in windowed mode. So I don't know if I have to put it in windowed mode, right? Because sometimes, because it's stretching it to my 55-inch screen here, right? So, but let's play it and see what happens. Let's see if it's a lot higher or not. All right. So yeah. Oops, sorry. All right. So yeah, so we're like around 90, 91, like the low 90s. Went up to 95 there. So the maximum was 95, whereas the other one was like 75 maximum. Now again, this is with MSAA times 2. So if you turn that off, it might very well draw more power because you're not using those graphics. But even so, I mean, I would say the average is about 92. right? Um, so what is it? 66 to 92, so that's what, 24, 26 watts difference, right? So what is that? I'm just guessing 30% more power, 35%. You're going from 66 to 92, so that's like, yeah, probably like 35%. So again, going from 4K to 1080p, you're drawing 35% more power, right? So again, you have to look at your build versus what you're actually going to be doing. You can't buy a CPU and say, well, Intel chips, they draw so much power at 1080p, right? But if you're not going to be playing anything at 1080p, then it's kind of irrelevant, right? It's meaningless, right? Because at 4K, you're going to be using much less power, you know? So far we had, 15 to 20% difference in the first game, a 55% difference in the second game, right? And this one we have a 35% difference. So these are significant differences, right? Because once you start getting, like I'd say, above 35, like 35%, I mean, depending on how much wattage you're using, because if you go from, like, say, using uh, 30 watts to 40 watts, that's not really a big deal, right? But if you're already using like 60 watts and you go to like 130 watts, that's a big deal, you know? So anyway, let me pause this and I'll go to another game. All right, we're in Black Myth Wukong benchmark. And again, I'm not benchmarking frame rates here, okay? Just remember that. We're looking at the power draw. We're just looking at the difference between the power draw from 4K to 1080p. Okay, this has nothing to do with, like, saying Intel's better than Ryzen or Ryzen's better than Intel. All it is looking at the wattage in different games so that you can see the swing that they take based on the resolution that you use. Okay. Now this one here, I don't know why it doesn't seem like it's setting up here, right? But anyway, I'm at borderless 4K, no VSync. Okay. Graphics I put on, I didn't really know what a 3090 can handle, so I put everything on very high. Okay. No ray tracing. DLSS is at 100, so that's basically just DLAA, as you can see there, which is just basically deep learning anti-aliasing. So it's just the anti-aliasing. It's not using the upscaler. It's just using it's like it's still examining the frames and then clearing them up, but it's not upscaling anything. Okay, so it's basically converting a 4K frame into a 4K frame of just better quality. Okay, at least that's what you would hope. Okay. All right, so let's run this benchmark and we'll see like around what the wattage usage is. Okay. So it's going to load it up. I might have been able to go to cinematic, but I doubt it because it doesn't look good already. It looks pretty low. Yeah, I mean, this is struggling. Look at this. 18 frames per second. That's not really realistic. So now we're GPU bound. So let's turn it down to high. That would probably be more sensible. Because we want it to be at least 30 frames per second, right? So that's just more. Medium might even be better. I don't know. And remember, DLSS is quite hard. DLAA is quite intensive, right? So now let's try high. See if that works better. As long as we're over 30 frames per second, I think we'll be okay. We might have to enable DLSS, I don't know. Wow, crazy. Look at that. 3090, still struggling to get 30 frames per second. Whew. Crazy, man, crazy. All right, let's try. Let's go back to, oops. Where are we going here? Let's try 50% resolution scale. So that would be like 1440p, I guess. All right. Let's put it on very high, though. Let's turn it up to very high and see if we can handle it. That still might be too much. Let's see. So we're at 50% resolution scale. Hopefully VSync is off. Okay, so that's a little better. But I still think it's too... Well, anyway, let's just look at the wattage for now. So it looks like we're like in the upper 60s to 70. Doesn't look like we're GPU bound anymore though. We're at 99%. But again, it looks like we're hovering around 69 for an average. It's a pretty game. Beautiful game. I think I'm going to change it to 75% though. Although I guess 54 frames per second is about where we would be. So that whole section there with the trail, it was about like 70, 71. So maybe the wooded areas, it's a little different. So we'll say 70. Okay, we'll just say 70. So 50 frames per second. I guess that's doable. That would be playable. So I think that's a real world scenario. Again, that's kind of what I like to do, like a real world thing. Because again, these benchmarks that they do, they're not always realistic, right? In the kind of setup you do, right? So, but again, around 69, 70 frames per second. Or excuse me, 69, 70 watts. Forgive me. So now we're going to change it to 1080p. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm going to have to put it in windowed mode again. So just again, we're at DLSS. I'll see it put DLSS back to 100. So we're going to go down to 50 where we were for the 4K because we want to be even. Why did this change? Is this what I had it on high? I guess we had it on this. Okay. So we were at 50% resolution scale, DLSS. So we're going from 4K to 1080. So we have to keep it consistent, right? Even though some of you might say, wait a second, but that's well under 1080p. Well, maybe we'll look at the wattage and see how it works out. Okay. If it doesn't work out, then I'll turn this up to like 75, which is probably where I should have had it for 4K, because this is getting a little low, right? Well, let's just look at it, just to see where it goes. Okay, so it's not really that much different in this game. Now at this resolution scale, it doesn't look that great. Like it's not ugly per se, but it's just uh, you can see it's very low resolution. So this may not be the best scenario. So let's quit. So there, it was about 5 watts difference. So it went from 70 to 75. So it wasn't that much of a difference. So let's just put it back to 4K real quick. Because I just want to... Well, let's run it at 75 in... let's run it at 75 at 1080p and see what the power wattage is, right? Because again, that's what you would probably put it at. And you may not even be able to use any resolution scaling, right? But let's just see what it looks like here. I'm gathering it's not going to be much different because this game is so graphically intensive. Right? Yeah. It's just pretty heavy all around, so it doesn't really matter what... If you have the graphics up to high or ultra, it's still going to be doing a lot of GPU work. Right? This is a more GPU-bound game. So as you can see, we're like up to 74 watts. So it's only a 4 watt difference. So in this game, there really isn't much of a difference. Okay? I don't think we need... So here's one of the tricks that I tried yesterday. To make like a happy sweet spot so that you still have the low wattage use, right? So I put it on 4K, and then I put the graphics thing to like, what was it? We'll try like 80, and then I turn it down to, I don't remember if it was medium or low. Like if you turn it to low and put the textures up, the shadows up, hair quality up, all that doesn't really matter, but global illumination, reflection quality. So vegetation doesn't really need to look that great. So this is fog here. Yeah, we don't really need to worry about that. Anti-aliasing should be taken care of by DLSS, so I don't know why that's even an issue here. View distance medium. So this is how I would probably put it, and then put it at 4K at 75. Okay. 4K 75, pretty much medium. I mean, we can just put it on medium. Let's just make it simple. We'll make it simple. So 75 at medium. No VSync. Let's see what the wattage is. Probably isn't going to be much different though. But let's see what the FPS is. Yeah, so it's like 50, say, 50-ish. So the game looks still pretty good. Right, I don't see too much. It doesn't really look that bad. I mean, it doesn't look bad at all, really. It looks okay. You know, there's a little bit of like shimmy in the trees. But you can turn the foliage quality up and then turn the resolution scale down to like 70. And you know, we're like in the mid 60s again, still 65, 66, so it's not really, it's a little lower than before. So you're talking like 5% wattage difference, you know, it's not really, in this game it's just not going to be much different, you know. So you could say we're averaging like upper 60s, right? Because in the beginning it was like in mid 60s. Here it's like 69, 70. So if we go to 1080p on the medium settings, it probably isn't going to be that much different. It's probably going to be 5 or 10 watts difference. But going from high quality to medium, that might have a much greater impact, right? So if we go to like 75 again, medium 75, DLSS 1080p. Let's see if there's any kind of a difference here now, being that we're at lower graphics settings. So we're starting out like mid 70s. So we're about 10 watts greater. So I was kind of pretty much on the money there. So at these settings, you're going to be at 10 watts more. You know, roughly, give or take, you know, probably 10, 11 watts. So again, that's like still, you're still only talking, what? 15%. So a 15% wattage difference between 4K and 1080p. And of course, if you go even lower on the graphics quality, then, you know, it's probably going to use more wattage because you're going to want more frames, right? But in that case, what I would do is just go to 4K and put everything at low, right? And just use DLAA. That's what I would do. Because you'll probably be at the, you know, you'll probably still use less wattage and the game will look, you know, okay. We can check that out. Yeah, so I mean, it's at highest is 80, so. So again, you're talking a 15% maximum 20% difference in wattage, 15 to 20%. So I mean, that's significant. Again, it is a difference. You know, so it depends on how you want to play. So this is the last thing I'm going to try. So I'm going to go 4K again. Graphics, I'm going to put, why is it at 37? Graphics, I'm going to do DLAA and turn everything to low except for the vegetation. I'm going to put that on high. Which that might just totally ruin everything else. But so let's just say you were worried about your wattage. What do you do? 1080p? No. So let's try 4K low with DLSS on to make it look good. And vegetation up because that's where a lot of shimmy was. See, I don't know what this anti-aliasing does here because it's not supposed to be active with DLSS. You know what I'm saying? But here it's even saying the current settings exceed the recommended settings. All right, so let's go ahead and try this here. 4K low, DLAA with the trees up. Now the DLAA, again, uses much more graphical power, so. But let's see how bad it looks. It's still saying that we're below recommended, so yeah, look at this, wow, crazy. That is unbelievable. 38 frames per second. That's nuts. Alright, so let's kill this. We'll go ahead and turn the resolution scaling up a little. Now I could use frame gen and all that, but I'm not going to do that because that's playing with a whole other different. So let's put it at 80 so it's not too bad. It's a little lower. So we're using DLSS quality. 4K VSync off. So let's try this one and see if we can hit like a sweet spot. Yeah, so it you know, doesn't look much different. So I mean, we're kind of still at 65, 66. So we can't seem to get any lower than that, you know? '64, '63, it's a little bit lower overall. And we're hitting nearly 60 frames per second, so that's not bad. And the vegetation looks better. So that makes a big difference. So we went up to 88 watts there. That was quite high. But that was just that one spot. But for the most part, we're like in the mid 60s. But we're going to be mostly GPU bound with this game. I mean, it seems that way anyway. Because, I mean, the CPU usage hasn't really changed much. In all the settings, it was like, what, 15 to 18%? It didn't really change much. But, I mean, this right here is a good experience if you want to get like a solid 60 at 4K, right? And the game looks acceptable. You know, it'll look better on a smaller screen. You know, I got a 55-inch screen here, so it's like, you know, that's going to, you know, skew things a little bit. So, I mean, the average was 62, 76 max, 52 minimum. So, I mean, you could play it that way, you know? But here, you only got like a, you know, changing resolutions. You have, it looks like a 15% wattage difference. 15 to 20. So it's not too bad. But again, there is a difference. That's all we're testing here. Let me pause and go to one more game. Okay, I am in Final Fantasy 16, I think it is, demo. So I had to play with the settings a little bit. Right now we are at oops, let's see here. 4K windowed, 3090. No VSync. I don't know. Yeah, VSync's off. Graphics are basically, I'm using DLSS quality because I had to. because I was getting under 30 frames per second at 4K. So I'm using DLSS quality, sharpness 5, turned off motion blur, vignette chromatic aberration. I have reflex on, and everything's turned up to high. No VRS. I didn't know how that was going to change stuff, but so that's where we are. We're at 4K. We're at like 60, 59, 60 watts. Now I don't know if you can save the game here. Let's see if you can save the game. These games probably don't have. Oh wait, here you go. Save. Where was it? There we go. Save. Let me save the game here. Good. That way I can start here. Maybe, if we have to. We'll see what the wattage is. So you can see here we're at like 60 watts. I'm at the starting out the tutorial, so all this crap I gotta go through.
We don't have time for this. All hell is about to break loose.
Yes, yes, yes. This game has too much cinematic. Maybe I should save it here. Let me save it here. Because this is where I guess I'm allowed to move. So let's save. So we're at save 2. Okay, good. So we're at 62, 64. Wow. Okay, it's all over the place. That's why I like to just stand in one spot, because
we're just in time.
Whoa. Okay, so they won't let us skip any of this, which is kind of like I hate. Sorry. So let me pause it until I get to a part where I can actually test. Okay, finally. Wow. Okay, so I didn't realize how to skip in this game. Alright, so we're back. We're where we were before. Okay. System. Everything's on high, DLSS quality. 4K windowed. Okay, so I'm running out of time now because a half hour passed because I had to go through all the cinematics and crap. So we're like at 60, 70 watts, so I don't have time to really run around like I wanted to. So it's like hovering between 68 and 70. So let's see what if it changes at all when we go to 1080p. All right, so we're up to like 84 watts. So let's move forward, see if it goes up any higher.
Preparation is key. We must be ready to march at any time.
I don't know why it's at 94 here. It doesn't make any sense.
She's heard this speech before.
The detail, maybe? I don't know. It's kind of weird.
They've closed the gates.
Let's hope the side entrance is still open.
Side entrance? I guess here.
No one is to enter the dungeons, including you, my lord.
Side entrance, side entrance. I can't see because it's a really dinky screen. Um,
All right. Let's get this stuff unpacked before the Duchess calls for our heads.
so here's the side entrance. All right, so it looks like we're at like I don't know. I guess when you're moving, it goes up. Kind of all over the place. So here we're at like 90. So let's go back to 4K and see how much it goes down. So we went from 90 to 72. Now it's like changing again. So, you know, 18 watts difference at high quality settings. Of course, the frame rate's not great,
These are accounted for.
right? So, would we play at this, you know, this graphical setting? Probably not. So let's turn everything down to medium. And we'll keep all these things on. All right, so we're going to do medium, DLSS quality. And we're up to like 46 frames per second. Things are getting pretty ugly real quick. So let's put up, let's turn everything down. Let's do let's keep graphical up to medium. It doesn't, there really isn't much we can turn down here. MPC quantity, I guess. But that's more CPU, so I think we want that, don't we? I think we want textures on high. Terrain can be mid, shadow can be low. I mean, there really isn't a whole lot we can change here except for, well, if we put up shadow quality and turn off ambient occlusion, oh, that's going to make it look really bad. That really didn't change a whole lot, actually. Didn't really change much. Oh, here we go. Let's do this. So we're going to do mid. Why can't we change it? We don't want dynamic. We'll put it on DLSS quality. So they turned off screen space and ambient and bloom shader, but they put on this. When enabled, increases rendering performance and quality by varying the shading rate for different regions of the frame. Now I don't know if that affects what that affects exactly, but we'll put on VRS if that's what they're recommending. But we still got DLSS quality, so that's all that matters there. So we're at 4K windowed medium with VRS. All right, so what do we got now? We have not really all that great still. 51 frames per second. So I guess that's playable. The game looks okay. Doesn't look as good as it did before, but acceptable. So we're at 75 watts at 4K. So let's turn it to 1080p and see if there's a big difference. So we're at 70, what, 74? Okay, so that's a bigger difference there. Because now we're less, more CPU bound. So we went from like 75 to 97. So that's 22 watts. So 20, 40, 60, 80. So that's a 25% increase, right? No. Like almost like 30% increase in wattage. Going from 4K to, you know, 30, 35%. Going from 4K to 1080p. So, you know, when the places like Hardware Unboxed want to, you know, tell you about what a CPU is using more wattage versus another CPU, well, you have to look at both scenarios. You have to look at the 4K versus the 1080p, because if you play in 4K more often than 1080p, then most likely the wattage is not going to make that big of a difference. You know what I'm saying? It's going to be insignificant, right? So, because both processors are going to use a lot less wattage, compared to what their maximums would be in like a CPU loaded situation, right? So, you know, 10, 15, even 20 watts difference is not going to make a big deal. Unless you play games like 12 hours a day, every day, it's not really going to make any difference. You know what I'm saying? In your bill, you know? Or if you play like those gotcha games where you got to like, get your daily rewards and you have to be logged in for 6 hours every day, you know what I'm saying? But even then you can just adjust the graphics so that your wattage is lower. Um, yeah, I mean, I would care more about my GPU wattage than my CPU wattage, right? Because right now we're using 297 watts, like on the GPU, and more watts now on the CPU, right? So we're using 20 watts more on the CPU, going down to 1080p. And let's put it on 4K and see what the wattage is on the graphics card to see if there's a big difference there. Yeah, so we just increased 33 watts on the GPU, right? So, and we went down 20 watts on the CPU. So, I mean, it's like you can't just look at the CPU only. You have to look at the GPU, how much that's using too. So, if you're using a lower a lower level GPU, it's going to use much less wattage, you know? So you're going to offset things depending on how you play the game, right? So I don't think there's any real clear cut decision that you can make when purchasing a CPU when it comes to how much wattage the CPU uses, because it still depends on what you're doing and how you play. Right? If you're playing at 1080p all the time, that's fine, but are you going to play at 1080p with a high-end graphics card? I mean, that's just kind of silly, you know? So you're just wasting power on the GPU anyway, right? Because you're just wasting your, because the GPU, a high-end GPU like a 4090 will scale down the wattage a lot when going to 1080p because it's such a powerful card. But a 79 XTX or an XT is not going to do that. That's going to be behaving like this one, right? Where you're still going to use a lot of wattage even at 1080p, you know? So that's just my take on everything. Um, you know, tell me your thoughts. Let me know what you think. And I'm going to go now. So peace.